Yeah, happy birthday, Don Don. But we kicked off this one talking about some listener feedback again, which is always interesting and beneficial. So please do give us more feedback.
We then touched on the status on the sophisticated investor changes and discussed an article from Bronwen Clune.
Yeah, some really good submissions from the industry. We then moved into the latest Berkshire Hathaway report, which was a bit of a sad report because it was the first one post Charlie's passing. However, there were some good bits to learn out of it.
Always great quotes in those letters to shareholders. And then we touched on the cleansing that the Australian venture capital industry might be facing this year and a prediction that there'll be fewer people working in VC by the end of this year than started.
Yeah, it sounds like an enema's about to go through the place.
And then we touched on Blackbird heading offshore to find bigger deals.
Yeah, and talking of big deals and M&A activity, we touched on the Octopus Deploy acquisition that they just made.
Brizzy-based company that's just going from strength to strength. And one of the founders, Paul, shared how he had looked at a number of M&A deals, but the people aspect always fell down. And we looked at an M&A deal between Afterpay and Block that didn't take into account the people aspect, and what an unmitigated screw up that's been.
Yeah, what typically plays out and how it goes wrong. And then we talked about Ed's post on go-to-market versus funnel metrics and the importance of actually looking at and analyzing your funnel metrics to raise the questions that should be answered.
Yeah, go-to-market, I think, has been made very complex, but actually get the funnel right at each of the stage, get the metrics right, and you've got a ticket to the ball game. Let's get into it. Good morning.
Morning.
Another day in paradise.
Yeah, how are we, lads?
Calm down, cough it up. Birthday boy.
Yeah, happy birthday to Don. Living the dream. Podcast on his birthday.
Don's 57 today.
My chronological age is growing into the age my face looks.
Happy birthday, big fella.
As I think we've discussed on the potty before, we had a portfolio company swear I was at least 15 years older than my license stated. So I think now I'll grow into it. And hopefully by the time I'm 55, it will go, oh, wow, you only look 53 or something.
It's a good aspiration.
Yeah. Jack, you've been having some sweet weather down there.
Yeah, yesterday was 37. Like, it's been really warm, but today we got a few raindrops. So it's feeling a bit like Queensland. But yeah, hopefully the weather stays around for next week for SaasTr, because that will always be much better when Adelaide's sun's shining.
I'm so looking forward to it. I know we've said that for the last few sessions, but yeah, it's going to be awesome.
It'll be great. As usual.
Aaron, the email we got was that we had to have our presentation decks submitted.
Do they not know how Tribe works?
Do they not know it
now? Like, I will still be editing and creating what it is like minutes before going up. So we're going to have to talk to Danielle and Craig.
Yeah, look, they'll understand. They've had me present before where I just rock in with my own laptop because that's how fresh the slides are.
Yeah. Because if push comes to shove, we just won't have slides.
If it's a choice of the two. Yeah, I'm sure they'll be fine.
Yeah. No, it's looking really good. I'm really enjoying all of the posts that are coming out of the different presenters and the different speakers.
I think just the fact that it's like this green zone, right, in Adelaide, where everyone except the locals, everyone's traveling in to be there. And so and everyone stays more engaged because of that. So it's just such a great time to catch up.
No, it's looking good. And we are closing one of our deals today, which only launched properly yesterday, but we've had really good shareholder engagement. So I think within 24 hours, it'll be done.
Yeah, I think we can almost call it closed even at this point. It's 23 hours from when it went out.
I like the fact that we always have to ensure that the beginning of the podcast explains how good we are.
And finish on Tesla.
There is a pattern here, isn't there?
If you don't have deep narcissism, what do you have?
Yeah. Well, look, we're going to touch later on the state of the Australian VC ecosystem. And I think there is a bit of self-adulation going on across the board.
And then we're launching another one later this week, which I think will be really good given some of their growth and the founders are known to us.
Yeah. So we've gone from averaging a deal a quarter to 2 in 1 week.
That's what this game is, right? It's you're standing at the bus stop waiting for a bus, and then sometimes
they all arrive at once.
Turn up, and then sometimes there are no buses. We're trying to invest in a lower volume of companies.
Yep.
But spend more time with the founder.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a little bit slow this morning. I'm listening to my brain trying to catch up. I was up north during the week cleaning out a flooded caravan park, and I think I've caught something that damaged my brain.
The visuals which I don't even know if we can even go there on this podcast, but the things that Don would have had ricocheting onto his body, skin, and potentially into his mouth are not worth thinking about.
As gurneying and cleaning up and remembering the video from the managers that were sent to me of the toilets overflowing, I've caught something from someone, but not through the right sequence of indifference.
You like caravan parks as an asset class, Don?
It is so good. So this one got flooded. The amenities is built out of Besser brick. So you hit that with the gurney, you catch a little bit of the clap and you move on. But yeah, it's a slab, power, water. People come on. We made this one adults only. That decision was made as I was driving out with my children, and the managers have been asking to do it for a while. People love a big pool that's adults only. And so we're differentiated a little bit in the marketplace, which means that we priced it accordingly. And the people, for the most part, because we're trying to provide a premium product, adults only, great pool, waterfront, big spaces. Some of them are drive-through. It means that you get some really good clientele. Like after this flood, it took me 24 hours to get up there, but within that 24 hours, the paying guests had actually gotten stuck into the cleanup and were all.
Oh, really?
How good is that?
Yeah, they just got on the end of hoses.
That helps the bottom line, Don.
Yeah.
That's some good customer loyalty.
But as an asset class, I really like it. We're looking at another site. You got to find the site in the right location, build the right product. But the thing that kills you in this tourism game is your off-peak season. And so up there, it's even worse. We could sell 10 times our space every day of the week between May and September, because all the southerners go up there. But then between November and February, it's a ghost town. And so you've got this asset that's not earning for a few months of the year. You've got to make hay while the sun shines. But again, we're taking a differentiation approach to it, providing things that are different to others, pricing it accordingly. And yeah, we're looking for other opportunities that can do the same.
But if you went further south, let's say northern New South Wales, would they still have a seasonal?
It's not as bad. The further south you go, it becomes a hell of a lot more linear. You still get your busy school holidays kind of periods, but the further north you go,
Just because of the wet season. Yeah.
the heat, the wet season. And that's where having the cabins as well as the caravans, because cabins in an off season, you get a lot of the European travelers that are more than happy to deal with the novelty of it. You give them a big air conditioned villa and a big ass pool. It means you can spend an hour outside floating in the pool, then go inside. So that sort of underwrites us.
Yeah. Trying to find a park that's also undervalued, or where you can add some capital to lift the value and lift the price.
Yeah, we bought this one from the receivers from Mayfair.
Yeah.
Old James McWhinney. So this was closed. And the last review that it had, I think, or one of the last 5 reviews, was a 1-star review that said this would be a great place if you wanted to shoot meth. So that.
So if any listeners own a caravan park where people are shooting up meth, Don's in the market.
I'm in the market. But this is a tech podcast. Should we talk about tech? I could talk about caravan parks all day.
Well, it's probably a segue from mopping up sewerage to talking about listener feedback about our shit bits.
Yeah. We asked the question last time after some feedback was my negative comments, mostly around Tesla, but in general, we expanded it. We try and take the lessons from issues that affect investors and founders, and we put out some feedback, and yeah, we got some people come back to us with some of their thoughts.
Yeah. So shout out to James Kwan for your email. It's always good to get some listener email. And I just love the title of it. Keep the shit bits in.
The fact that he described the intergenerational gap as a epoch, I guess today being a year older, that means the generational gap is even bigger. I spoke to a couple of other listeners, and one of them said, I was going to give you a call about an issue that I thought you would come to later regret discussing. And I said, what was the issue? And he said, well, I can't remember. There's so many of them from you.
Listeners, please take notes. There's that many.
Oh. I think broadly we had a discussion, put the values first. What do we value? Ensure that we're looking after the company, and that will be our guiding compass. And from time to time, we'll fuck up.
Yeah.
But the beauty of having your own podcast is no one can take you off the air. And we also agreed that we would keep going until there was no listeners.
Yeah.
And with the last episode, those that listened to the episode within the first 3 hours got a different episode to those that listened to it after 3 hours, because rich people with lawyers are scary. And I've got 3 kids to put through private school, apparently. So we're not journalists. So anyway, I won't go into that any more than that. So please keep the listener feedback coming in. I thought it'd be good to just touch base on where we're up to with a sophisticated investor changes, because this is going to affect the ecosystem. This is going to affect 99% of our listenership, I think. And I think it's important to understand what's coming. Bronwen Clune did a really great article, I think, of summarising some submissions from a range of people in the ecosystem. Did you get a chance to see that one?
Yeah, no, I did. I know we're going to unpack it, but I think some change is coming.
I think the industry needs to accept that a big change is coming, because in one of the previous articles, the Financial Services Council says it should be hiked to 5 million. And they acknowledged all of the commentary coming out of the early stage ecosystem. And in that article, it said the potential overhaul has faced pushback from the angel investing community, who warn that funding for startups could be severely affected by any tightening. So they acknowledge that. But Mr. Briggs from the FSC submits that providing easy access to capital is not such a great public policy goal that it justifies exposing mum and dad's investors to the risk of having to sell their home to cover an investment loss. So when someone as powerful and as broad as that entity comes out and says, yeah, we acknowledge it, so they've heard it, but we don't think that, as far as my life's experience, buckle up, this is happening.
It's really interesting. When the UK government introduced the EIS and SEIS investment incentives, so significant tax write-offs for investors making investment into early stage tech companies, what ended up happening was a whole heap of what we'd call mum and dad investors threw a whole heap of cash into a whole heap of startups. And we had a roundtable with the ministers who, like the government department and the minister who was responsible for it. And their view was it was actually a really smart public policy, because private sector capital was being used to create essentially like a rush of learning curve for both investors and founders. So their view was, let's let the private market deploy a heap of capital into stuff from which the ecosystem will learn and hopefully kickstart the investment landscape. And it's proven to actually be working.
I think there can be ways of protecting mum and dads.
Oh, 100%.
Or their house.
Yep.
The people that invest in early stage businesses, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know anybody that invests in early stage businesses that doesn't realize that the statistical chance of an individual investment of going to zero far outweighs its chance of making any money.
Yeah.
And the people, I don't think sophisticated is the right word, but the people that invest in this particular asset class have a risk profile and an asset allocation that is different to the mums and dads that are being pushed into these dodgy management investment schemes.
Completely agree. And like we've talked about previously, like the concern can be addressed through education or other requirements, more regulation on our side, on the service provider side.
They could definitely introduce other things like a cap. If you don't meet the sophisticated investor criteria, like they should just cap the maximum amount you can invest to then protect retail investors, because it's just ridiculous that there are other instruments that retail investors can put their money to that have no ceiling on the amount they can lose, but you can only lose 1x on an investment in an early stage company.
Yeah.
No,
like Briggs' comment from the FSC just highlighted to me that this is about instos being pushed out of the asset class. And so for them, it seems to be just a supply issue. And so with more capital needing to be deployed, it seems to be this push to reduce the number of investors that can eligibly invest in it. So I think it's going to happen.
follow the dollar.
Buckle up, ecosystem.
What was it? 1013 put out some stats. The number of investors, if they do increase it, the number of investors that won't now be eligible, and from memory, is quite high.
Well, so the Tech Council submission points out that StartMate, Australia's biggest and oldest accelerator, estimates over 300 investors across its funds would be deemed ineligible. And so this represents 80% of all investors in their funds and approximately 25% of committed capital. That's
crazy, isn't it?
Maxine Minter of Co-Ventures highlighted the importance of early stage investors in her submission. We could see a reduction in the amount of venture capital investment by up to 50%. A reduction of this magnitude is likely to result in a crippling impact on the growth of job creation businesses, killing off the next generation of scale-ups like Canva. Take that, Mr. Briggs. Cheryl Mack CEO of Aussie Angels. And I think Cheryl's done some great heavy lifting here. And Bronwen acknowledges that in this article, who galvanized a lot of sector pushback on the proposal, said she supported excluding the family home if it meant additional consumer protections for those who are vulnerable. The test should be lowered to 1.5 million in max view. And Cheryl points out this would be more in line with the US and the UK. So the idea being take out the family home and then have a different number. So there's a whole lot of people that are put in there. So
Yeah. And I think it's, when we're talking about this, it's not just quantum of dollars. It's also, if we start excluding a lot of this angel investor class, like with the Cut Through Ventures report showed that they invest differently to VC funds. They invest at a different stage, but their investment return profile is very different. To Adrian DeMarco's point, he gets very different success rates and returns across his portfolio because he doesn't have the nuances of being a fund manager where there's a life of the fund, he has to return capital. He has much more freedom and flexibility.
little LinkedIn video I did of the surfer helping the young
girl
onto the. So there's two people in that video. There's one holding at the back that gets them onto the wave, and then there's the flying down the wave. And angels and sophisticated investors at that phase are the people that get startups into that initial position of the wave. You take them out, you've got far less people, far less founders. And as this article points out, it's going to disproportionately, it's female investors and founders. You're just going to have far less people in a position to ride those waves, because that initial notion of getting them on there is actually the 4Fs and the angel community.
100%.
We'll see what happens there. We're knuckling down. We shall be the cockroaches and just deal with what comes. Now, the way we look at certainly VC investing, but probably angel as well, is that you're trying to find great businesses and then help them. And I think the word durability from the context of investment, I think you have to think of Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, don't you? Like, they were the ones that really keep pushing durability and moats.
Like, just unbelievable performance spanning decades.
And so we just had their latest letter out that Jack shared with us. And this was a little bit of a sadder letter because it begins by acknowledging the passing of Charlie. But Jack, you shared that with us. What were your takeaways and learnings?
It was, to be honest, first time reading a Berkshire Hathaway shareholder letter, but it's just so awesome to see 56 years on and Warren still emphasizing the importance and obligation to his shareholders and what it means to be an allocator of their capital. But yeah, what an amazing performance. We were chatting about the Berkshire Hathaway website, and it's so funny to go on and there's probably a correlation between the quality of a fund manager's website and their performance, like it's inverse. But yeah.
I'm looking at the website at the moment.
Yeah, I've got it open too.
I'd say it was built like 82.
Yeah. Like, nothing there says we're trying to impress you by anything other than just here are the links to our investments, performances, shareholder letters. And Jack, you picked up at the bottom, they're still plugging the insurance offering.
Yeah, Geico always be selling. Like, at the bottom for a free car insurance quote that could save you substantial money. How good is that?
Love it. A couple of quotes that came out of there. So the stock market is massively larger than it was in our early years. Today's active participants are neither more emotionally stable nor better taught than when I was at school. For whatever reasons, markets now exhibit far more casino-like behavior than they did when I was young. The casino, however, now resides in many homes and daily tempts the occupants.
Such a good quote.
I'm one of them. Give me some sweet dopamine, baby.
Like VC in 21.
What I thought was really nice was Warren paying homage to Charlie. And what he said was, in reality, Charlie was the architect of the present day Berkshire, and Warren acted as the general contractor to carry out the day-to-day construction of that.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely love it. Warren also paid homage to the original advice that Charlie gave him when he was just kicking off Berkshire. And he said, focus on investing in wonderful businesses purchased at fair prices and give up buying fair businesses at wonderful prices.
Old Ben Graham cigar butt approach is what led Warren into Berkshire.
Yeah.
Warren was a buy stuff, strip it, make some money. And Charlie changed that to let's buy businesses. That's where that durability really came out of. And Charlie and Warren always talked about the Ben Graham quote: stock
Voting.
market in the short term is a voting machine, and in the long term is a weighing machine.
Yeah. And there's so many parallels here with venture, right? Like we see this. Deals that are hot, voted hot. But let's see long term how that weighs out.
And neither Charlie nor Warren were big fans of Elon either, so represent. Now, that doesn't mean to say that Warren and Charlie were all aligned with different parts of the community. And Charlie Munger in 2014 told the Wall Street Journal that it would be better for venture capitalists to light their money on fire with an acetylene torch than to invest in internet startups. Then at the age of 99, he had another message for venture capitalists: to hell with them.
Or with them. You always knew where he stood.
That's fine. I'm cool.
Yeah. But look, we might be about to head into this era of, I don't think it's Charlie's doing. There might be a bit of a retracement of the sector and some consolidation.
Yeah. Paul Smith from the AFR put out a article called Breaking Point: Australia's venture capital scene is facing a cleansing. And the article starts off by saying American venture capital firms that used to look down their noses at Australian investors are now seeking their checks, following how badly the industry needs cash after the startup bubble bursts, and why local VC firms are struggling to raise their new funds.
I don't think they ever really look down their noses at Australian investors. But anyway, I think the point is true. And we're seeing it locally too. It's interesting watching the market and how people are promoting to raise or complete funds or add new investors. So it's definitely.
My favorite one was, we can't market to you, but we're doing a raising. It's like, all right, someone's on Struggle Street.
Yeah. Yes. Under our license, we're not allowed to promote this, but we're promoting this. It's like, okay.
We're in such a position that we've got to run close to the wind on it because, yeah. But it's real. We are seeing, I think we've said it on a couple of episodes and we've already seen it this late last year, early this year. We've seen some emerging funds that are calling it quits, pulling up stumps and saying, no, too hard.
Yeah. Chatting to the others in the industry, a lot of those emerging fund managers or those with smaller funds or those that deployed a lot in 21, those vows and are struggling to demonstrate any sort of return prospects.
Yeah. Make no mistake. Part of Tribe being successful in the future will be sheer luck of only really firing off towards the very end of. So it was just sheer luck that we didn't get caught up too much in that. And some of the most recent deals, the valuations are times less than what they would have been a few years ago.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of luck in our time here when we started and now being in this era where there are phenomenal opportunities.
And we've had time to earn our stripes. And in one particular deal, we are going to be completing partly because of the value that we've been able to demonstrate to other portfolio codes. So this article goes on to say Tidal Ventures expects to finish raising its 2 open funds this year, but it's been raising one of those funds since 2021 and one of the funds from 2022. Tidal raises are healthy and have progressed well across several investor segments. Flying Fox, rather than trying to raise a $20 million fixed fund, Flying Fox has instead stuck with rolling funds. And I think that's a really smart, clever way. With the commitments, that allows you to get a few things in place, but do it on a rolling basis. Now, that leaves you a little bit of a risk that people don't complete, but it's better than having nothing.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good model.
No, completely. And we know a couple of people raising at the moment who are quite high profile, have really phenomenal investment track records, including return of capital, who are still struggling to raise and close even small fund sizes. So it is tough out there.
I posted a video this morning of the police trying to knock down a door that obviously was bolted shut. And the post I did was, this is what happens when you don't have product market fit. But in reality, it could have also been emerging managers trying to talk to LPs.
Look, all this stuff, I'm reminded of climbing Everest, where they say that even if you do everything right, you can still die on the mountain. And I think there is luck in this. There is timing in this. There's a lot of factors. It's going to be a bloody interesting year ahead. And our plan is to cockroach it. There'll be some opportunities here for a bit of consolidation, maybe some acquisitions, maybe some roll-ups, maybe some fund transfers. So it'll be interesting come into the year.
So in the article, it also said there will be fewer people working in venture capital in Australia at the end of this year one venture capitalist predicted. He said he did not see it as a bad thing, as it could sort the lucky from the talented.
I'd love to know who said that.
There is now a joke in venture capital circles that if an investor sends out a rare update selling some or all of their stake in a company, known as secondary sales, it will soon be followed a week later by a request for investors to tip in more cash. What's the problem?
I was going to say, is there even a delay? We're seeing them come at the same time.
Yeah. In one unusually candid comment on a podcast, USBC Jason Lemkin suggested returns from that period were so universally poor that investors didn't care. The beauty is in venture capital, we can always just raise another fund. The great thing is everyone can write off their 2021 fund. The LPs aren't going to be holding that against them. I don't know what fucking planet Jason Lemkin.
Where is that market?
Jason, so he's SaasTr. He's the founder of SaasTr. So he has a bias for deal flow, right? So even if the vintage of 2021 didn't go right, he has such a bias towards seeing the best SaaS companies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's got pick and win to his advantage, but far out. Like, I cannot see that playing true for most fund managers.
No, but the thing about like illiquid markets, if a fund manager does well at the start, they're like over the long term, they're also going to do well. Like it's not like the public markets. And it's because there's a bias towards deal flow. Like once any founder in Australia knows to go to Blackbird to at least apply off the back of their early success. So they have a bias towards seeing the best.
Yep, that's true. Rayn Wong, in response to the article, he did a post. He said, after reading the AFR article, the local VC scene facing a cleansing, I fear not many people will be left to buy my ebook. He's then posted parts of his ebook before the industry gets decimated. In fact, some really valid points, right? If you want to be good in VC, you've got to, one, be able to raise 10 to 20 million. And he points out that means you've got to have an extensive network of people, probably with 100 to 200 million in assets or more. And that is true. Then the ability to find more money companies. And that's true as well. And we're seeing, I think, some investors damage their reputation by deciding not to follow on at all, which means why the fuck would you want to have them in your corner? And then the ability to execute and distribute money to investors.
Simple but hard, right?
That's it.
That second point, what you said, Don, is so true. Like Blackbird and YC and others are copying a bit of criticism because when they don't follow on, it's deemed this huge signal to the market and almost makes that company uninvestable. And so now they're talking about even hiding their shareholdings on the cap table, which is insane.
If the founders haven't performed, or maybe they have done the best they can, but it turns out that the market just is far harder, or the thesis doesn't ring true, or all of those kinds of things, then there are acceptable reasons not to follow on. What we're seeing, though, is good companies not getting follow on because the returns in other areas at this point in time on a short-term basis are just really good. And all my view is if you're too optimized on a point-in-time return, you will leave great opportunity on the table because point-in-time returns always change. Like they don't, nothing's all that durable from a return point.
Yeah.
Now, whilst this article starts by saying that US investors are looking to Aussies, so that's US coming to Aussie, one Aussie investor is going from Aussie to US. And there was a article that Blackbird is heading offshore to find bigger deals.
Yeah, there were some interesting stats in that article. Or maybe I pulled this, I can't remember actually. No, I pulled it from Cut Through Ventures. 10% of deals struck in 23 exceeded 20 million in Australia, while with only 2% of deals exceeding 50 million. So for that size of funds under management, they have to.
Once you've gotten to that size, you've got to be deploying big checks. It's one of the reasons why emerging managers tend to outperform the big funds from a percentage point of view, although you can't beat a big fund from a quantum of dollars return point of view. So that's why different LPs will invest in different fund structures.
But I wish them all the best. I think it's a smart strategy. They have to do it. So happy hunting.
Yeah, so their mandate, I'm fairly sure, is ANZ founders globally. So it doesn't have to be based in Australia or New Zealand. It's just they can invest in a founder based in the US. It's an Aussie.
Great. Well, we need all of that in the ecosystem. Now, another company that's hunting globally that is actually a Brisbane native is Octopus Deploy. Now, Octopus Deploy, they do release management, deployment automation, and DevOps solutions to deploy applications to test staging and production environments on premises or in the cloud. Now, I hadn't heard about Octopus Deploy until in 2021, they came out with a massive bang, raising 172 US at a $750 million valuation.
Like another great story that's not really told. I think it was about that time when I first heard of them. I didn't realize how big they were. Like I'd heard the name through Brisbane, but didn't know about it until I actually looked at the numbers.
Why they're in the news again is that they've just bought another company to add to their stables. They bought CodeFresh in a deal reportedly worth 28 million US. Now, CodeFresh looks like they provide complementary services to their core platform. If you're providing something that's sticky, that's a core part of a customer's process, acquiring complementary tools and products that you can then also sell to them is a great strategy if executed well.
Yeah, one of our portfolio co's just before we invested had made an acquisition, which was to add new features into their tech stack to offer, just to complete that roadmap at a faster rate than having to build it internally.
It's something that Tech One with Adrian DeMarco did quite a bit. You often see it in that enterprise space. He'd been exploring a bunch of M&A deals over the years that start excellent on paper, but always fall down at the human level.
Yeah.
And I think that's simple to say, but that is a really important insight because a lot of people just do these M&A deals because of the paper side and don't even take into account the human side.
Oh, absolutely. You acquire a young, high growth company that's driven by a high entrepreneurial energy, and then you stick that inside of an existing structure, and that entrepreneurial energy is just squashed. And very quickly, that what was driving that growth and fueling that is just lost. And then that culture of all those followers is then lost. And I think that the human side is just often not understood or valued in M&A activity.
Yeah, I'd say especially in the public market, it's not valued because it's actually an arbitrage that they're going for the multiple. But in the private market, it's a little different. Like they're not chasing the arbitrage.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. And
Another point, a little bit unrelated, but if any listener gets the chance to hear Paul, one of the founders of Octopus Deploy, speak, 100% recommend to go. He spoke at one of 1013's Christmas parties and it stole the show.
Yeah.
Great. Octopus Deploy clearly has great product market fit, but then built up some strength and customer adoption that then allowed them to raise that big chunk, which then now allows them to then go and buy things. So there's a sequence here of almost like earning stripes. And I think what they've really got right is doing things in the right sequence. Also during the week, an article came out on Capital Brief by Jack Derwin. Jack Derwin has been doing some really great deep dive work. And the article is Pay Later, the inside story of Afterpay's inevitable decline. And I want to underscore that inevitable, but probably add just a few different perspectives. I'll link to this article in the show notes. It sounds like a bit of a mess.
Yes, sounds like it. I always love that word though, inevitable, because it seems like every demise in hindsight was always inevitable. But I think in this case, this market segment, I think heading into the US, and if you look at some of the other acquisitions in this space and how they've played out, there probably was an element of predictability.
Yeah, and the inevitability that I want to touch on is, as we discussed in last week's episode, the life cycle. And human life cycle is predictable, organizational life cycle is predictable, but the life cycle should be more looked at rather than a destination. It's really a set of conditions at a point in time. And if you imagine driving a car, some cars have really fast acceleration, really tight turning. Some cars are very slow to turn. They feel very cushy. They're not really aggressive. Like it's different conditions at a certain point in time. And when you look at these two companies, they are actually very young on the organizational life cycle. And the conditions culturally that are happening internally make some things inevitable and predictable. And so Block being a young toddler type company that itself highly flexible, low systems, processes and controls, then going and acquiring a company, again, is like another toddler. It's two toddlers getting together and trying to work things out. Like it's just, you don't have the core systems, processes and controls for it to go smoothly. And that's where that inevitability, in my view, comes out. Now, if you look at the life cycle, often what happens is companies in the aging phase, no flexibility, too higher controls, systems and process that's stifling innovation. Because they can't innovate, they then go and acquire companies. But then there's still an inevitable failure, and they end up killing the young growing company because they take away all of its flexibility, all of its innovation, try and make them fit into the bigger companies' systems and process, and all the good people leave. And so it's actually really hard. What you actually want, the best companies that acquire companies are more at the prime phase of an organizational life cycle, where they themselves have been through the journey of healthy systems, processes, and controls, but they've still got enough remembrance and knowledge of what the early stage looks like. There's a bit more respect for it. There's a bit more tolerance for it. And they, in a more healthy manner, try and help that toddler grow up. Whereas in this instance, it's two toddlers running around, and it sounds like an inevitable, unmitigated disaster.
Have you ever seen it work? Two companies at that stage of the life cycle coming together successfully?
That's a really good question. I'm sure it has, but behind the scenes, it will have been a mess. And if it did fundamentally work, it's because the revenues and gross margins, the business were so great, it could be all of the shit to be hidden. In this instance, and with a lot of these, when you pay a big number for something and then have huge costs and expenses, and then when your revenues don't meet, you've then got to start cutting costs. The biggest cost is people. Then you start affecting morale and culture, which means you lose more people, which means you affect the morale and culture. It ends up in a bit of a spiral. The most successful ones are where, like I say, it's more not in the aging as in dysfunctional aristocratic view. Think of News Corp every time it buys something. I mean, MySpace had the jump on Facebook, but have a read of what News Corp did to MySpace after the acquisition. Yeah. Have a read of any of these big aging gorillas when they buy the young company, what they do to it, and they kill it. But then two toddlers running around, they often don't survive either. What's really interesting is the people that we really respect, TDM Capital Partners, they absolutely love Block. And I shared a note that they had done on Block. And Jack and I were having a little bit of a chat on it earlier. Jack, what were your takeaways on TDM's view of Block?
Oh, my only takeaway was it was written in 2021, right? So they, by all accounts, could have updated their beliefs. And something they do say on their website, like the only competitive advantage that holds true over the long term is people and culture. So that's something they're super upfront and clear about. But Don, what were some of the competitive advantages that they outlined in the article?
Yeah, so they said, TDM said that the competitive advantages were the network effects, the brand, and scale economies. So that they were the three essentially. Their view was the network effect was enhanced by connecting these two networks. So that would only add to their competitive advantage.
Yep.
They also said under brand, adding more trust. And then scale economies was just looking at the operational leverage across by bringing the two together.
And so when you have a look at this chart here, for listeners at home, I've just put the chart of gross profit in US dollars. It's just up and to the right on a 45% CAGR. So really, really impressive. Yeah, people and culture. So this article would suggest that their people and culture strength is quite poor. Having said that, okay, they made a shitty acquisition at the top of the market and they've now had to cut. Question becomes can that people and culture survive so that way they can take advantage of these competitive advantages? And so just because they've had one fuck up from an acquisition, is that going to undermine it? But I think these network effects, brand and scale economies clearly is doing something right because of this gross profit. The only thing I will say is on the focus of scale economies approaching 2 billion in EBITDA, throwing back to the fact that we discussed Charlie Munger. Charlie always did say, anytime you see EBITDA, just replace it with the word bullshit.
This is very pointed. One of the portfolio codes had an investor roundtable the other day, and this conversation came up about EBITDA, and I had a very different point of view on its valuation multiple. But yeah, I think it's going back to this one. Don't you agree? Those 3 points of network effects, brand, and scale, that's the what, but it's the how, the integration in the merger. It's the details of the how. So I think the TDM thesis stands true, but the integration of the two companies on that cultural aspect is where I think fell down on the how.
And TDM, to be fair on them, bought into Block well before Afterpay. I would love to have been a fly on the wall if TDM, given what we know of them, because they look at culture, they look at the 7 powers, but then they also are big believers in valuation matters. I'd love to be a fly on the wall when they found out they were paying $39 billion for Afterpay.
Yeah. Be interesting.
But I think some of the lessons here again is that if any founders or investors are listening, there's a couple of points here. Buying things during irrationally exuberant times just never quite works out. And then understand where you are in the life cycle. And if you're a toddler, just because you have the ability to buy something doesn't mean that you should, because actually it takes time to build the systems, process, and controls. And some of the items described in this article, it says the integration of Block was a disaster. It was a mess pretty much from day one. Sure, it looked good on paper, but it didn't seem like there was ever a logical plan. Well, that's because the acquiring entity is still very early on in its life cycle, and to my knowledge, had never acquired anything of that size.
Yeah.
From the very start, it was unclear how Afterpay's 1,500 plus staff were going to slot neatly into the US-based conglomerate, nor did there seem to be much leadership on how this was practically going to be achieved. And so going back to the Octopus Deploy discussion just before, he described that on paper, it looked good, but at the people side, they fell over.
Yeah, 100%.
So I think some really good lessons there of the approach of Paul from Octopus. On an earnings call, Dorsey trumpeted a ton of synergies. Anytime I hear synergy when it comes to M&A acquisition, you know that acquisition is going to be an unmitigated fuck up.
So, why is that?
Synergies are spreadsheet based often. We'll save this, we'll save that. But they lack that human element, and they almost never take into account the complexity of achieving them and the cost of achieving them.
Yeah.
Not only that, if an acquisition is going to achieve a synergy, that's almost like a one-off gain. What we really need is acquisitions that actually create new value. And that value always starts with revenue and the customer. And when I see entrepreneurs saying there's synergy, just the orientation is wrong. I prefer acquisitions where there's no synergy, but at the customer level, there's huge value. Now, some people, depending on your definition, some people might say, well, the synergy here is customers buying products A and B, and then they really want product C. And so I get my synergy there. If you call that a synergy, no problem. But a lot of the synergies that we hear founders and boards talk about is more on the cost related item. But then there's the other thing to be really careful. And it's something that I see all the time. And it's a mistake that I made. Just because you have a relationship with someone doesn't mean you can force some other shit down their throat.
Yeah.
People buy from you and your brand contextually. And it's not that easy just to suddenly shove something else down their throat. If it's going to work, either it's got to be so similar that absolutely makes sense. But actually, if there's some nuances or some differences, or it's a slightly different concentric circle, you find it's really, really hard. And even in my previous life of insurance claim management, we did building claims, just starting to say, okay, well, we'll do motor and we'll do commercial. Brand stood for high volume, low quantum building claims. To suddenly pivot into those other spaces, which by the way, were shitty margin and a fucking dumb idea, but it hurt the building specialization brand. And then we were just a me too on the others. And we ultimately found it very difficult.
Yeah. When the Australian Computer Society acquired River City Labs and Startup Catalyst, from the ACS side, it was partly about increasing their brand relevance. So trying to look young, youthful, innovative, because they hadn't touched that at all. They were known as the mainframe server community of key professionals from the 70s and 80s. So trying to be more relevant and also attract a younger demographic into their membership base. So for them, it was like acquiring this brand. And if we acquire this cool brand, by virtue of that, we will be cool almost. And also from our perspective, this synergy thing of, wow, now we get access to this database of 40,000 highly technical members that we can activate into the startup space. Highly agile, young, early stage of the life cycle organizations, and immediately ACS put in the layers of process control.
To throw my 2 cents in there, so I agree with you guys. Where I think it goes wrong is M&A goes wrong when they try and centralize operations. So if you look at Tiny, Constellation, or even Shore Capital Partners, they're really successful through M&A, but it's a decentralized model and they keep operations totally separate.
They don't try and bring rigid checklists and controls and systems. They say your role is to hit a budget.
Yeah. And they hold the CEOs to account, and they keep it that separate that the individual businesses are paying for their own time to use the other businesses. It's super decentralized and it seems to work. And like these 3 companies have just grown, compounded year on year.
I think Constellation, he raised 30 million and it's now worth
like
40 million.
Yeah. Tiny as well. But even Shore Capital Partners, Don, that was the podcast that they did the 500 acquisitions. I think they haven't had one that's failed yet. It's only been up and to the right.
But aging organizations, if you think of PAEI, producing, administrating, entrepreneurial, and integrating, PAEI, they're different energies. In a young company, it's P&E, producing results with entrepreneurial creativity and flexibility. The opposite side of the life cycle is A&I, right? It's A, administration, rules, process, systems, and controls. And then there's like this integration where the company's no longer reliant on one individual. But then as they age dysfunctionally, the rules, systems, process, and controls get too big, and that then kills the I. And so with these aging companies, they attract lots of A's. They attract bureaucrats. They attract people that like structure and rules and controls and a checklist. And then they start having revenue start to fall because they don't have the P and the E. They can't produce. They don't have the entrepreneurialism. So they often have a lot of cash. So they go and buy their P and E. And then they bring their A and they first destroy the E and then they destroy the P. And as you pointed out, sadly, what River City Labs was built into now doesn't exist.
Catalyst is gone, no more missions. And look, RCL still exists, but it's very different form. But yeah, look, these things play out repeatedly. Should write a book, Dom.
Well, I think there's another podcast just called World Full of Patterns. That's all these things are. They're just constantly repeating patterns, and the same patterns happen in the animal kingdom and the human life cycle and the organization and all of these. They're the same thing.
Very true. While we're having this conversation, we've just had another investment commitment come through for our.
So that how good?
Yeah, awesome.
You can cut this out, but who is that investor?
The one that got the IM yesterday that's been referring us deals out of Sydney.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Good to activate some new investors in this one.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
All right. Well, we'll leave the M&A bit, but companies that get into a position of M&A have generally been able to get their business in the right direction, get their go-to-market strategy. But one of our friends of Tribe, Ed from Octopus Ventures, Ed Keelan, he wrote a really great post starting with, has go-to-market strategy eaten the simple funnel metric? And I must admit, that really resonated with me because it took me a little while to get my head around go-to-market. But then I realized that go-to-market, just talking about the funnel of things we've got to do.
Yeah. We're talking about the strategy, but I loved Ed's post. Bring it back to the great line for me was, speedy referral to the funnel can tell you more in an hour than 3 months of go-to-market workshopping. And I think, even thinking about one of the meetings this week, they were questioning their go-to-market strategy, but they didn't have the data from their funnel to be able to actually inform the decision. They didn't know what was driving the cost of customer acquisition in different channels. They didn't know, they hadn't done the modeling of effort in versus value out. They didn't know where the funnel was exactly breaking down. So it made this conversation around their go-to-market strategy was just theoretical because we didn't have the data to actually inform the decision. Whereas if we'd focused on the funnel and what the funnel was telling us, and I love Ed's framing, it would have given the questions to ask. So, and I think it's a really powerful article. I encourage listeners to, if you're a founder, have a read.
Well, let's read it for them.
Okay.
And bring it up.
And shout out to Ed. Ed's based in Octopus Ventures in the UK, co-invested with us into it was actually Tribe's first deal. Yeah. We co-invested with them, really. They led it.
If you need to do AML and identity verification of any kind, Apply ID is your company and make it fast, simple, and cost effective. Isn't that right?
KYC. Get onto Apply ID.
So we'll go through quickly. It's rare to get more than 20 minutes into a conversation about generating revenue in a scale up before someone mentions GDM. Often this comes at the cost of focus on facts, which in my opinion means the simple funnel metrics. I'm releasing a full blog later, but in summary, here are the key points. 1, sales experts are pivoting to become GDM specialists with all-encompassing jargon and the expert's own variation on the original diagram. ICP, feature benefit, core strengths, value proposition. It's the wrong place to start, like a doctor who searches for a cure without a clear understanding of the diagnosis. I think that bit is really important because it's in life, there's a lot of these things that are trying to dress up things to differentiate, but they're actually the same. Funnel metrics may be tucked into frameworks, but usually nearer towards the end of the process than the start, and often dismissed in favor of 20 questions on market positioning and value propositions. And I think that's absolutely correct. So often it's all this time going into these questions and different discussions points like, no, just what are your metrics? If they're good, you're fine. If they're shit, you got to go sort it.
Yep.
This complexity distracts from the most powerful tool, the funnel. What goes in and what happens in the mixer and what comes out at the end. And I think there's so much complexity that I see with some of these models out there that my little brain can't handle it. Another VC shared passion for the funnel and said to me, people don't want to look at the reality of what the funnel is telling them. I agree. By focusing on everything but the numbers, we can kid ourselves. Often what the numbers are telling us is scary, and it's more attractive to brainstorm new branding strategy. I think that's totally true. Someone did a post and it's like someone's ARR growing every month. And if that's what they're tracking, that's really good. But the very next graph was new ARR added every month. And that was down to the right.
Yeah.
Okay. You can have that somewhere in the slide deck, but we actually want the rate of change. The rate of change is where it's at.
The delta.
There's a lot of excuses. We only sign enterprise clients, or our sales process is complex. As often as not, the real story is that the funnel metrics tell the story and leadership just doesn't want to hear. If you're unsure of how funnel works, he's created a basic spreadsheet, which he has below, that you can DM him for. The most common issue I see in scale-ups is a focus on the end of the funnel. If the sales don't come through, it's the fault of the salesperson instead of the lack of leads coming through the top. That's because the sales to come through the implied number of MQLs can be intimidating. That is so true. I'm reminded of a presentation I once saw of a guy who totally changed the company by no longer measuring sales. They just measured the forward-facing dashboard. This was actually the Executive Connection is a group of CEOs. And what they used to do was measure the number of CEOs that would join the Executive Connection, of which I was one. But that's a really lag indicator. And actually, that's not relevant. What they started to realize is you find good chair people who have a good network, that then drives. So they stopped measuring participants like me in tech. They just started measuring how many conversations were we having with chairs, tech chairs, how many conversations were leading to an engagement, and how many new tech chairs were being put on. And the inflection point of that organization's growth was unbelievable. And it started to become a global powerhouse for that particular kind of segment. He goes on to say, I don't like weighted pipelines. I've just never seen one that's any good. And they give the impression that big sales are just around the corner. I totally agree. Weighted pipelines
All the time.
I don't struggle. Have a 1% chance of $1 billion deal.
Yeah. And they run the maths on it and present this. It's like, what the hell? And it never plays true.
Never. Yeah. The only weights to put on your pipeline are the weights to sink it to the bottom of the ocean. So
I don't know why people call you negative, Doc.
And it's my birthday. If I can't even be positive on my birthday, wet. Well, I got a smoker. Got a smoker as my.
Oh, so good.
I'm going to smoke so many meats. And this is a fully electronic automated one. You dial in your shit.
Wow.
You put on your meat in the morning. You go to work.
Mate, you've set my expectation up here for our investor event on the 11th.
On the 11th, I'm going to have the smoker cranking.
Oh, I can't wait. You booked your flights yet?
Yeah. I'm hoping I get a shot of the Walmart.
Assuming they're working.
The tractor's back up and running. The lawnmower's still being repaired. But anyway, we digress. Great article from Ed that we'll put in there.
Yeah.
Which sort of dovetails. Ed, I think, is a great partner because we've seen him at work. Same with Adam from Octopus.
Yep.
New founders that get an opportunity to work with those guys, highly recommend. But there was a post from SaasTr. If you had to do it all over again, would you pick the same VCs? And the results were, yes, for sure, 22%. 32% maybe, 46% no, I definitely pick different. That's a fairly damning.
It is fairly damning. I think the answer does depend partly. I want to say that when the student is ready, the teacher will present. It's partly in their own life cycle.
I think it's just a good reminder, do your due diligence, do your homework. And It's always fine when things are going well. The problem is when things are not going well. The reality of early stage investing, if you were to do a heat map of percentage time going well and percentage time not going well, the reality is, even for some of the most successful companies, the majority of time we spend not going well like that. Or at very least our perception of things or our stress and strain.
But it's probably fair to say the times when we can add the most value are when things are going wrong.
Sure.
So that's all we've got for this episode.
Never any shortage of good content to talk about.
What are we looking forward to?
Looking forward to, housewarming this weekend. So having some people over for drinks and nibbles. I don't know where we're going to fit everyone, but it's more a celebration of the blended family being together.
That's this weekend, is it?
Yeah. Look, if you can't make it because you're busy smoking,
All right, Aaron, I'll give you a call after this, Aaron. Jack.
you're forgiven.
Like last week, Don, haven't got anything planned yet. Something will come around.
Stop bragging, you arrogant.
Yeah.
My life is my own. I can do whatever I want.
I remember that era. Flexibility, no responsibility.
Don, what have you got in store?
Well, I brought in a turf cutter. Have you ever seen one of those? It's an
Yeah.
amazing little machine. Brought in a
That's
turf
fun.
cutter, pulled up the turf, pulled out the little lumps that just made me annoyed, and then laid the turf back down. My darling wife then came back and said, "Have you actually done anything?"
It looks exactly the same.
It looks exactly the same. And I said, it's exactly like a facelift. You want to look better, but you don't want people to know you've had work done. And so that was the greatest compliment she could have paid.
I love it. I love the reframe.
It's the same with organizational structure, right? It's like a good facelift. You don't want to have big scarring and massive changes all at once. You just want these little iterative changes that people go, "Oh, that's better.
You're looking great.
Yeah, you're looking great." And then given the VU event, I've got a whole lot of stuff to finish. It occurs to me that the way the fire pit slopes, I'm going to have to make a stand to sit on so that people can
Cool.
see.
Given
And I'm going to have
originally
to take
was
out an insurance policy, given some of the risks.
given it was originally this small little investor event, and given the number of people that now want to attend, I think you need to build stadium seating.
Well, it's in the paddock, so there's
Okay.
room.
All right, good.
All right, good. We'll
Thanks,
catch you on the
boys.
other side.